ดี๋ยวเราก็เดี๋ยวถ้าพร้อมแล้วก็โอเค
นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะเสด็จไปดีไปดีได้ยังประโยชน์ที่จะเมื่อยทรงเป็นสายที่หาที่เปรียบได้ทรงเป็นศาสดาของเทวดาและมนุษย์ทั้งหลายทรงเป็นผู้ตื่นทรงเป็นผู้ใหญ่ใหญ่ทั้งหลายที่ถวายนะขอมาวันนี้นะเพราะว่าวันนี้ใส่มาอันนี้ว่ารู้ว่าjust 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. What the man? Yeah. Okay. No, for the man with the monk is okay. You just pass to the monk hand. But the lady, as our religion, cannot touch the monk, so you have to do like that.
Nice.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. สันทิติโกอาคาลิโกเอหิปัสสิโกโมปะนะยิโกปัจจตังเวทิตาโพวินยูพระธรรมอันสมเด็จพระผู้มีพระภาคเจ้าตรัสแล้วอันผู้ปฏิบัติเองชอบได้ด้วยดีไม่ประกอบด้วยกรรมควรเรียกมาดูได้ควรน้อมเข้าไปดูอันผู้รู้เรียนรู้ได้ธรรมะคือคุณากรส่วนชอบสากลดูจะรวมประทีปชัชวานแห่งองค์พระศาสดาจารย์ส่องสักสัญญาณสว่างกระจ่างใจมนทำใดนับร้อยคนเป็นแบบชุมชนและก้าวกับทางอริการสัญญาณอุดรพิสดารการติดตามพิสุทธิ์พิเศษสุขใสอีกคำต้นทางอันใดนำเงินมาทานไทยปฏิบัติปฏิยัติ
ของมีด
จะครองให้ลวงลูกฟองยังโลกอุดรโดยตรงข้าขออ่อนตรงนอบธรรมจำลงด้วยจิตและกายวาจา
เชื่อมเกือบไม่รู้จะทำอะไรคุยบอกถ้าเกิดไม่มาวันนี้อะไรก็ต้องเรียกไปหาทุกวันวันนี้คือไหว้พ่อคือเมื่อเช้าวันของพ่อต้องไหว้ยี่บอกว่าขอให้พระมาสักก่อนทำมาขอให้ทำนะไปกันได้มีสองทางแบบสองทางเขา
เขาผมว่ามันไปที่คนอื่น
Oh, is it? Sorry.
ยังวันเตพัตตานิสัพปริวารานิสีลวันตัสสะโอโนชยามะสาธุโนพันเตสีระวันโตเอตานิพัตตานิสัพปริวารานิปฏิคันหาตุธัมมากังทีฆารตังหิตายะสุขายะข้าแต่พระคุณเจ้าผู้เจริญข้าพระเจ้าทั้งหลายขอน้อมถวายซึ่งภัตตาหารกับของที่เป็นบริวารทั้งหลายเหล่านี้แด่พระคุณเจ้าขอพระคุณเจ้าจงรับซึ่งภัตตาหารกับของที่เป็นบริวารทั้งหลายเหล่านี้เพื่อประโยชน์เพื่อความสุขแก่ข้าพเจ้าทั้งหลายสิ้นกาลนานเทอญ
ยะตาวะริวหาปุราปาริปุเรนติสังการังเอวะเมวะอิโตทินังเปตานังโอปกปติจิตังปฏิตังทุมังกิปะเมวะสมิจตุสัมเปปเรนตุสังกปาจันโดปนรสุยะตามานิจุติระโสยะตาสัมปิติโยวิวัจันโตสัพพโรโควินาศตุมาเตภวัตวันตรายโยสุขิติกายุโกภวะอภิวาทนาสิริสนิจังวดาปัจจายโน จาตารโอธัมมาวัฏันติอายุวันโอสุขังมาลังภาวะตุสัพพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเทวตาสัพพพุทธานุภาเวนะสันดาสุติภวันตุเตภาวะตุสัพพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเทวตาสัพพธัมมานุภาเวนะสันดาสุติภวันตุเตภาวะตุสัพพมังคลังราคันตุสัพพเทวตาสัพพสังฆานุภาเวนะสันดาสุติภวันตุเต
เอบูชนียาอุดมเลิศเสริฐภูมิราจริยาหุนติปุนุตตราดุสาสกา
เนื้อหาครับจะเป็นสบายดีสบายดีเราเชียร์ร้อนทั้งที่เนาะปีที่ร้อนนานไม่ว่าจะหมดร้อนต้องยกเว้นจากกันไปหลัง
Yes, I knew it was.
Everybody thinks I'm tired. They all get too tired to me as soon as they see them.
But you also you are far from us anyhow.
I look like tired.
Yeah,
They don't
because I look like you and you know your side, so we look quite similar.
ไม่ป่วยฮะป่วยเลยไม่จำได้ว่าต้องไปแถบบ้านใช่ต้องไปวันที่1เขาเลยบอกว่าเข้ามา
โลกานุปาลโภราชาสัพพะภูตานุกัมปะโก อันข้าขอถวายบังคมพระบาทบรมนรินทรราชเรืองามเป็นดินพื้นภพภูมิสยามทุกเทศเขตขามนิคมสีมามณฑลพระเดชแผ่ทั่วภูวดลพระคุณอนนท์อเนกและเหลือโบราเลี้ยงโลกบำรุงประชาเพียงดังดวงฟ้าดุมาจรธาตรีพระญาณส่องทั่วธรณีใครหนอกานีและร้ายก็ทราบโดย
อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวาพุทธังภะคะวันตังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตภะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนัมสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนะ มินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะมะยังพันเตติสรณเนนะสหปัญจศีลานิยาจามะทุติยัมปิมะยังพันเตติสรณเนนะสหปัญจศีลานิยาจามะตติยัมปิมะยังพันเตติสรณเนนะสหปัญจศีลานิยาจามะ
ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะ
นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะ
พุทธังสรณังกัจฉามิ
พุทธังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ธัมมังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ธัมมังสรณังกัจฉามิ
สังฆังสรณังกัจฉามิ
สังฆังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ทุติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ทุติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ทุติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ทุติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ทุติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ทุติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ตติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ตติยัมปิพุทธังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ตติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ตติยัมปิธัมมังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ตติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ตติยัมปิสังฆังสรณังกัจฉามิ
ทิสรณกัมมนันนิติตัง
อามะพันเต
ปานาติปาตาเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิ
ปานาติปาตาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิ
ปฏินาดานาเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิ
อภินาทานาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิ
กาเมสุเมจัจจาระเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิ
กาเมสุวิชาจาราเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิ
มุสาวาดาเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิ
มุสาวาทาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิ
สุระเมรยมัจจปมตทานาเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิ
สุราเมรยมัชฌปมาทฐานาเวรมณีสิกขาปะทังสมาธิยามิ
อิมานิปัญจสิกขาปดานิสีเลนุสุขติยันติสีเลนะโภคสัมปดาสีเลนะลิปติยันติสมาสินังเวโสดาย
สาธุ
ตัวขยับที่ค่ะไม่ค่ะคู่ไม่เท้ายอดทองกระบอกนั่งเดี๋ยวไว้ภาวนาเก็บไว้ก่อน
But it's always good to come here, always good to see old faces and new faces, and it's always good to come together to practice the Dhamma, to listen to the Dhamma, to try to absorb and to understand the Buddha's Dhamma. This is always good. And it's always good to try and do good things. Because when you reflect on it and you look at the world, you see many not very good things going on, some very terrible things going on, some awful things. People being killed and maimed, people going to war, people developing hatred and aversion for each other. And this is common, and this is the world. And it goes on, and there's nothing new in it at all. It's been going on from time immemorial in all parts of the world. And sometimes people say, well, you know, the Buddha's teachings, they are of the East, they are of a particular time in the dim and distant past, and then the question is, are they relevant today? Well, the principles which the Buddha taught, the things he was concerned about, are for all time. The bad things that I mentioned have been going on forever, it seems. And it's always been in people's nature to have aversion for each other, to develop greed, and basically to just not understand what they're doing, what their life is, what the world is all about. And it's in consequence of that failure to understand things as they really are that all these problems arise. Because people don't recognize their place in the world and where they've come from and where they're going, that they again and again make these mistakes and allow their minds to become intoxicated with greed and aversion. And as you know, most of you here are Buddhist people, and you know very well that the Buddha spoke of the three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. If you can just stop and listen. Listening is an important exercise. So just try to give up your own things for the moment and just try to listen. So these three, greed, hatred, and delusion, they poison our minds, they poison our world. And delusion, not understanding, misunderstanding, is the parent of these other two, greed and hatred, greed and aversion. And these defilements are so easily whipped up in us. They're there in all of us. Our minds are spoilt by them, and with little difficulty, those who would want to have more bad things happening in the world, have more of their own way, gain more, they easily whip up hatred and greed, and then people go to war and hurt each other, and there's nothing good comes from it at all. I think I've told you here before that one of the things that brought me into Buddhism many, many years ago was a commitment to no longer having anything to do or support in any way, shape or form warfare. It never works. It's always more trouble. And even if you appear to have short-term gains, well, they are just that, short-term gains, but at the same time heaping up more trouble for the future, more aversion for later on. The Buddha himself said that the defeated live in pain. When the defeated live in pain, what do? They plot revenge. And so the cycle goes on and on of hatred, heaped on hatred. And there's no end to it until someone cries, stop. And that's what we have to do. We have, in our own lives, at the very least, to say, stop, no more to greed, hatred, and delusion. And to do our best to free ourselves from these poisons and live an entirely different kind of life. Now, if delusion, if not understanding, not knowing, is the parent of the other two, then obviously, to be free of the three, we have to look at the whole problem of not knowing, of delusion and ignorance. From that stems everything. Buddha, of course, said that our suffering as we have it comes from our tanha, kilek tanha, from this defilement of craving. But where is that rooted? And later he went on to explain that that craving is rooted in ignorance. It's rooted in not knowing, not understanding. So there we have it. We have here a practice which is aiming to replace ignorance and delusion with an understanding of truth, the true nature of things. And this is a marvelous thing, because truth is truth. It's not about belief. It's not about what some deity or some authority or other says. It's founded on secure and abiding principles. And the whole practice of getting truth has to follow similar principles. You've just taken the 5 precepts. Well, those 5 precepts, yes, of course, the Buddha spoke about those a lot. Taught again and again about the need to abstain. To abstain from killing, that means not doing it anymore. Abstain from killing. Abstain from taking that which is not given. Abstain from sexual misconduct. Abstain from false speech. Abstain from alcohol and drugs. It's a therapy of abstinence. Stopping these things. Because until you stop, until you put an end to certain things, nothing else can flourish. Nothing else can grow in its place. So yes, he talked about the 5 precepts, but they are sensible rules of conduct. They're saying to not do things which are harmful. The whole principle behind these rules of conduct is harmlessness, doing no harm. Think about it. These are not rules of conduct that you follow simply because someone said you should, or some deity was supposed to have decreed that it should be this way. They are sensible principles, which if you follow, you live a comfortable life. You live a comfortable life because suddenly you're no threat to anyone. If the whole of society abides by these rules of conduct, then you have an amazing, comfortable society. And fear is practically vanished. So these are principles. They're not there because the Buddha said, or because some authority, some monk or other says you must do it. They're sensible, abiding principles. And abstaining, not doing these unskillful things, because all of those things are obviously inherently unskillful and wrong. If you kill, you take life. You take something you can never return. You can't say, once you've killed someone or killed some creature or other, oh sorry, I'll make that up to you. It's dead. It doesn't spring to life again. That life is over. You can't do anything about it. If you take someone's property, if you steal something from someone, well, of course you harm them. Often people don't seem to realise this. As most of you know, I work in the prisons. Some prisoners just do not get it, that by stealing something, by going into someone's home, rifling through all their possessions, pinching the things which perhaps have great sentimental value, that they do harm. But of course they do. People feel violated, hurt. It's difficult to get over it. Your private area has been broken open. Great harm is done. Not just the harm of
taking from someone those objects, but harm to their minds, harm to them as persons. And they live with that hurt perhaps for decades. You can't quantify, you can't measure the harm that you do when you steal something, especially something which is of sentimental value. Sexual misconduct, well, we hear a lot these days about the harm that's done to people. And that harm, that hurt, goes on, perhaps ruins a person's life. These rules of conduct are simply to help people to stop doing that which is harmful. And when you abstain from harm, or when you do your best to abstain from harm, then you put yourself in a better place. Because you're also not harming yourself. And you're giving yourself space and time and the opportunity and the sensitivity to open up and come to an understanding of things as they are, which is very difficult because we are all very heavily conditioned beings. We all know that we've lived this life. We all know that we've lived for a certain number of years, a certain period of time. What we don't know, we're not sure about, though we're taught this, is that we may have been living for many other lives prior to this. Some people have memories. Most people don't. But we're all very different. And we have certain character traits, and certain gifts and talents and all that. And you have to wonder where all that's come from, if not from previous existences. But if that's the case, then we've been conditioned not just by what's happened to us in this life, but by what's happened to us in many lives prior to this one. Which means we are heavily conditioned. So to cut through all that, all those beliefs and views and opinions, is not going to be easy. But that's what our quest for truth asks us to do, demands us. The Buddha taught this very important discourse known as the Satipatthana Sutta. Like most of his teachings, it was given in a very simple place, in the open air, no glorious buildings, no great temples, no great pomp and ceremony about it at all. Simply sitting there with a group of his followers. There's a place in India, in New Delhi, which is supposed to be the place where the Buddha taught that sutta. It's a great sort of heap of rocks. And you can imagine, perhaps, the Buddha sitting there and his followers sitting around, while he talked about the importance of just being mindful and aware. And of course, to be mindful and aware, you have also to bring concentration to mind. You have to focus your mind. You have to be able to stop your mind from going out to all sorts of stimuli and becoming caught up in them and intoxicated by them. You have to stop that. Well, it doesn't work really to just say, I'll stop my mind. Your mind stops when it focuses on one thing. And so that hence the practice of trying to keep your mind focused on one thing. And then, when your mind becomes quieter and clearer, then you can start to really watch what happens to you. You can just simply sit in awareness. That's where this teaching on mindfulness comes in for Satipatthana. I think the Buddha was just quite arbitrarily giving examples when he gave that discourse about how you might be mindful and aware. Obviously, he talks about the body first, because that's something that we're all very aware of and very concerned with. We're all pretty caught up with our bodies. because our bodies give us, well, they're with us all the time, and inevitably they give us a certain amount of trouble. And we're also very kind of self-conscious about our bodies, about the appearance. Do we look nice? Do we look handsome, pretty, young? You know, all this stuff. And people go to a lot of trouble, a great deal of trouble, to make their bodies, try to make their bodies look the way they'd like them to look. And it leads you actually into more and more delusion because, frankly, one's getting older and most people trying to look younger than they are. Some people go to a lot of trouble to look younger than they are. I told you this before, I was on a train one day with Ajahn Chah and just here now, going down to the south coast here, and somewhere near Guildford the train stops and this young woman gets on at the other end of the carriage. It's a long carriage with an aisle down the middle, and as I recollect it was only here and I at one end, and this young woman gets on and comes down the aisle. And as she's coming towards us, and she's obviously spent a great deal of time that day getting herself up to look her best, nicely dressed, got her makeup, hairdo, the lot, And he's watching her as she's coming down the aisle. And then he nudges me in the ribs like he used to. Liar. Gog. Means liar. She was not telling the truth. She was not telling the truth. She was lying to herself. She was lying to everyone else. And of course we do it. Everyone does it to some extent. So, there we have it. We have these bodies. The Buddha thought about that first. Be mindful of the body. We're forever moving, gesturing, sitting, standing, walking, lying down, lifting things, putting things down. All the time we're using these bodies. So he draws attention to this. Be aware, be mindful what you're doing with your body. And a lot of people are not. A lot of people just are not aware of the space around them, of how they use their bodies at all. So the Buddha's first message there is start taking notice of how you're moving, of what you're doing with your body, how you're arranging it. Be also mindful of a basic function of the body, breathing. That's happening to us all the time. Most of us don't think much about it until we have difficulty breathing. When you have a cough or someone clutches your throat, then you're suddenly desperate to breathe. But otherwise, you don't think too much about it. Be mindful of your breathing. Then he goes on to talk about being mindful of the nature of your body. There's this body. Well, he likens it to a sack. It is a sack of skin. Inside this sack, there's all sorts of stuff. And he compares it to someone who takes a sack of grain, opens it out, and this is this kind of grain, this is that kind of grain. Well, here you have it. This, heart, lungs, stomach, all these bits and pieces inside this sack. A lot of people don't like to hear all this, but this is it. This is what the body is like. So being mindful of your body, looking at it as it is, you start to get into the habit of cutting through the appearance, cutting through the delusion, in other words, and beginning to see things and know things as they are. And this is a vital and important practice, because this will take you through this conditioning to where you can begin to see and understand and know for yourself the true nature of things. The Buddha goes on. He talks about how the body ages and dies. It gets thrown away. most of us have been to funerals. I find funerals a bit peculiar, to be honest. But I have to go to funerals, I have to take funerals from time to time. I've told people close to me that when I go, I don't want any funeral. I don't like funerals. So no funeral. I've told the young monk who lives with me, just get someone. I've told him to just, when I go, just to get someone to dig a hole and get me in it quick. And no fuss. I don't want funerals. I don't want people coming around and saying, "Oh, you're such a wonderful person." You know. They always do that. Even if they hate the guts, they say, "He's wonderful." So I don't want any of that rubbish. Get rid of it. It's just, it's just like an old suit of clothes. When it's finished, it's finished. Get rid of it and move on. So that's what I've told him to do. I hope he'll do it. Or someone will do it when it happens. But, there are funny things, funerals. You go there and there's all this palaver about, the undertakers marching in and bowing to the body and all the coffin and all this sort of business. I think it's ridiculous. The body wears out, it's thrown away. Flowers on our shrine, when they come, they're beautiful. After a week or two, where do they go? The compost heap. That's where this goes, the compost heap. And that's as it should be, that's the reality. So you have to get used to it, but people don't, you see. The funerals are all part of the delusion of permanence and reality. Speaking, Buddhist monks are only allowed to go to funerals if we go with the object of contemplating death. And so when I take a funeral, I took one the other day, a very interesting one the other day. Someone rang me up, an undertaker rang me up from Birmingham and said that this lady died, and before she died she'd asked if she could have someone, she wanted Buddhist chants and bells at the graveside. Well, I haven't got any bells, but I said I'd do the chanting. So I had to go to this natural burial ground nearby, which turned out to be a field with a kind of half-built sort of building of some sort in the middle, kind of sand in the middle. And when I turned up, of course, I found that I wasn't just supposed to be chanting at the graveside. I had to take the funeral with all these people there, with expectation written all over them. None of them Buddhists. And I had to take the funeral. Well, what did we do? I didn't know who this woman was. I knew nothing about her at all. I didn't even know her name. Even if I had, I wouldn't have remembered it. More than once at a funeral I got to the name and I suddenly realised I couldn't remember it. But anyway, I talked to them about the reality of death. This is the last teaching this woman has given you. This is her last gift. This lesson. It reminds you of your own mortality. This is where you're going to go as well. And it's very important, that we take this on board, because it is part of truth. It helps break this delusion of permanence. So many of us go around thinking we're going to live forever. We're not. We may feel as though we could. On a good day, we feel pretty good. Everything's great. And you feel like you'll live forever. But you won't live forever. And sooner or later, somehow or other, death will claim you. It will claim all of us. For me, this month is an important anniversary. It's the 50th anniversary since I, as a revolutionary young student, was party to the opening of a new school, new drama school. 50 years ago. We're talking about a reunion of 4 of our group who are already dead. None of us will be here for the centenary. These are realities. And so at funerals, that's what I do. I remind people of their mortality. Don't think that's what's happened to this person whose life we are remembering is any different from what's going to happen to you. We all go through that door sooner or later. And the Buddha drew attention to this and what happens to the body in that first part of the Satipatthana Sutta. And then he goes on to talk about feelings, to talk about the mind itself, being mindful and aware, knowing what sort of mind, what kind of inner attitude you have. To be aware of your feelings, not to be caught up in your feelings, intoxicated with your feelings, but to actually be mindful and aware, to learn to watch and know what's going on within yourself. And the last part of that discourse is a bit uncertain as to what he quite meant there. He talks about being mindful of phenomena, things that, as it were, come to mind. But at the same time, he's talking about his own teaching. And the word Dhamma has this dual interpretation, of course. So he's saying there to be mindful and aware, to know in your own experience those Four Noble Truths. And I think this is very important. It's very important to recognize that what the Buddha was talking about was actually what we experience. Because there are an awful lot of what we used to call armchair Buddhists. We used to joke about them at places like the Buddhist Society with a cocktail on one side and a Dhamma on the other. Well, Buddhism isn't like that. It's actually about what you're experiencing. It's very important, it's very profound, it's a very extraordinary message. But it's to be understood here, not there, not on the bookshelf, not even in the words of what I'm saying, but actually in your own experience. And that last part of the Satipatthana Sutta, to my mind, is the Buddha pushing that home. So there we have it. We have this extraordinary message about truth. We have a message of truth which obviously cuts the ground right from delusion. And if we can replace our delusion and ignorance with understanding, then greed and aversion and all the terrible things of the world fall away. If we can just stop ourselves living in that world of unreality, and then we won't be a prey anymore to people's persuasions, to old conditioning. We can be free. And we at least can be making a positive contribution to this world that we live in. And most of us, I think, would want that to be the case. So I think I'm going to end there, really. We need to, we want to free ourselves from greed, hatred and delusion. If you want to do that, then you have to attack delusion. And you only attack delusion by looking reality in the face. And doing your best constantly to be cutting through and stop fooling yourself, stop fooling other people, but just do your best to look and see things as they really are. And that really is part of the profound message of the Buddha. See things as they really are. Live with things as they really are. Not as you want them to be, not as you believe them to be, not as you've been conditioned to think them, but as they really are. And then there can be no more greed and attachment, and no more attachment.
Samanta Jakavaresu
We can sit back for 10 minutes for meditating.
Devata สัทธัมมังมุนีราชสาสุนันโตสังฆโมคคทานสักเคกาเมจารูเปกิริสิกรตเตจันตาลิเควิมาเนทิเปรัเทจะคาเมตารุวนาคหเนเกหวัตุมมิเกเตอุมมาจยันโตเทวาชลทลวิสเมยัพพคันธัมพนาคาติทันตาสันติเกยังมุนิวรวจนังสาทโวเมสุนันโตธรรมสวนาคาโลอายัมภาทัน
Keep
ตา
your eyes closed, it's very important.
ธรรมสวนาคาโลอายัมภาทัน
Not
ตา
looking at what other people are doing.
ธรรมสวนาคาโล
What are you doing?
อายัมภาทันตา
Then quite deliberately just let all your thoughts, feelings, worries, likes, dislikes fall away. Just feel them just falling.
ขอให้ข้าพเจ้าจงเป็นผู้ไม่มีเวรอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียนอย่าได้มีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจ
Become mindful and aware of your breathing.
ขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไป ขอให้มารดาบิดาครูบาอาจารย์
Gradually draw
ญาติส
all
นิ
your
ทมิตรส
attention,
หาย
all your attention to
พร้อ
your
ม
breath.
เพื่อนๆประพฤติพรหมจรรย์ทั้งหลายของข้าพเจ้า
You're breathing in
จงอย่าได้มีเวร
and you're breathing out.
อย่ามีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียน อย่าได้มีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจ ขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไป ขอให้ผู้บำเพ็ญเพียรทั้งปวงในอารามแห่งนี้จงอย่าได้มีเวรอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียน อย่าได้มีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจ ขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไป ขอให้พระภิกษุสามเณรและอุบาสกอุบาสิกาทั้งปวงในอารามแห่งนี้ จงอย่าได้มีเวรอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียน อย่าได้มีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจ ขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไป ขอให้ผู้ถวายปัจจัยสีให้แก่ข้าพเจ้า
Just try to keep your mind
จงอย่าได้มีเว
simple
ร
rhythm.
อย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียน อย่ามีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจ ขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไป ขอให้เหล่าเทวดาอารักษ์ที่อารักขาข้าพเจ้า และเหล่าเทวดาอารักษ์ที่อยู่ในวิหารอาวาสอารามแห่งนี้จงอย่าได้มีเวรอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียน อย่าได้มีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจ ขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไป ขอให้สัตว์ทั้งหลาย สิ่งที่มีชีวิตทั้งปวงพูดทั้งปวงบุคคลทั้ง ชนทั้งปวงเทวดาทั้งปวงมนุษย์ทั้งปวงสัตว์นรกอสุรกายทั้งหลายทั้งปวงจงอย่าได้มีเวรอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียนอย่ามีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไปขอให้สรรพสัตว์ทั้งหลายผู้มีกรรมเป็นของตนจงพ้นจากความทุกข์ยากลำบากจงอย่าแคล้วคลาดจากสมบัติคือความสุขความเจริญที่ตนจะพึงได้ขอสรรพสัตว์ทั้งหลายผู้มีกรรมเป็นของตนที่อาศัยอยู่ในทิศบูรพาในทิศปัจฉิมในทิศอุดรในทิศทักษิณในทิศอาคเนย์ในทิศพายัพในทิศอีสานในทิศหรดีในทิศเบื้องล่างในทิศเบื้องบนขอให้สัตว์ทั้งหลายสิ่งที่มีชีวิตทั้งปวงพูดทั้งปวงบุคคลทั้งปวงสัตว์ที่เนื่องด้วยอัตภาพทั้งหลายทั้งปวงหญิงทั้งปวงชายทั้งปวงพระอริยบุคคลทั้งปวงปุถุชนทั้งปวงเทวดาทั้งปวงมนุษย์ทั้งปวงสัตว์นรกอสุรกายทั้งหลายทั้งปวงจงอย่าได้มีเวรอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียนอย่ามีความทุกข์กายทุกข์ใจขอให้มีแต่ความสุขตลอดไปขอให้สรรพสัตว์ทั้งหลายผู้มีกรรมเป็นของตนจงพ้นจากความทุกข์ยากลำบากจงอย่าแคล้วคลาดจากสมบัติคือความสุขความเจริญที่ตนจะพึงได้ขอให้สรรพสัตว์ทั้งหลายผู้มีกรรมเป็นของตนเบื้องบนไปจนถึงภวัคคพรหมเบื้องล่างไปจนกระทั่งถึงอเวจีมหานรกโดยรอบแห่งจักรวาลขอให้สัตว์ทั้งหลายที่ท่องเที่ยวไปบนแผ่นดินจงอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียนปราศจากเวรปราศจากทุกข์ปราศจากอันตรายทั้งปวงขอให้สรรพสัตว์ทั้งหลายผู้มีกรรมเป็นของตนเบื้องบนไปจนถึงภวัคคพรหมเบื้องล่างไปจนกระทั่งถึงอเวจีมหานรกโดยรอบแห่งจักรวาลขอให้สัตว์ทั้งหลายที่ท่องเที่ยวไปในน้ำจงอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียนปราศจากเวรปราศจากทุกข์ปราศจากอันตรายทั้งปวงขอให้สรรพสัตว์ทั้งหลายผู้มีกรรมเป็นของตนเบื้องบนไปจนถึงภวัคคพรหมเบื้องล่างไปจนกระทั่งถึงอเวจีมหานรกโดยรอบแห่งจักรวาลขอให้สัตว์ทั้งหลายที่ท่องเที่ยวไปในอากาศจงอย่าได้มีความอาฆาตพยาบาทและเบียดเบียนปราศจากเวรปราศจากทุกข์ปราศจากอันตรายทั้งปวงเถิด
ข
morning I was just about to go somewhere and the phone went, and funeral bunty. And that's when I discovered I was supposed to be in Handsworth taking a funeral. So they came for me, took me to Handsworth, and took me into the room, front room of this house. And of course I hadn't got a clue what Indians do at funerals. And I had no chance to prepare anything. So I walked in and I stood there. And then I looked around and I suddenly realised that they didn't know what to do either. so I was okay from then on. It was a very, very impressive occasion because when we got to the and it was a very English undertaking, which was what the sodas are. Very, with the hotels and the loft and processing down the road. And then when we got to the crematorium, I was in, I think, the third car, and I got out and I counted all the vehicles in it. I think it was about 17 vehicles crammed with Indians, and the last one in was a double-decker bus. Like the chanting was very, I gave the precepts, and Indians take the precepts very, very, very impressively. Buddham Saranam. But as they came in, I remember this too, as they came in, I'd never been in a crematorium before. It's my first time I'd ever been in one, English crematorium. And this undertaker was a real sort of Uriah Heep type character, tales and all the rest of it. As they all came in, he's at the front, like Victor Sylvester in Come Dancing, saying, ladies on this side and gentlemen on this side.
It's like a wedding.
It was hysterical. Anyway, it all went well.
Excuse me. Can you explain more when you said when we practice the 5 teaching from the Buddha, that then we make room, we make space for ourselves?
5 precepts.
Yeah, and then you said, okay, when we do that, we can create some good karma for the others. But what about when we make our own space? Yeah, I wasn't quite clear.
Well, when you are not doing anything harmful, if you're doing things that are harmful, then your mind isn't going to be really very settled, because there's going to be elements of remorse, perhaps a bit of guilt. There's always a great deal of self.
But not many people can actually be aware of that.
Well, they may not articulate it, but their minds are occupied, and there's a great deal of self. And when you stop doing those things, then I can only express it as there's a degree of space. There's not the same self-interest. There's not the same self-promotion there, because and of course your mind is clearing away. It's not so concerned with remorse or fear or anything like that. There is a sense of ease.
So it might affect you positively in terms of your psychological well-being.
That's what I mean by this. You give yourself space.
Yep. I'd like to ask a question about the doctrine of anatta, and there being no self. I understand the Theravadists are quite strict on this being a fundamental feature of doctrine, of there being no self. When I think about it, I can only see the situation being such that there are features of the human that we can see, the 5 skandhas, the body and the mind and the thoughts and what have you. And the Theravadists always talk very strictly that there's nothing that underlies these that gives rise to the properties. But when I think about it, I cannot but think that there must be something that gives rise to those properties that we observe. Mustn't there be something that gives rise to the properties that we observe of the human? Whether we can see that thing or not, whether it's transcendental, I wanted to ask you about them. Are you absolutely strict on there being no possibility of a self? Or do you hold that there could be a self which is beyond human perception?
I wouldn't say that it's just Theravada that's, as you say, strict about this. I don't like the terminology to say we're strict about it, actually. But it is an essential part of Buddhist teaching. And I recognise that it is perhaps the most difficult. That and rebirth are the two most difficult things, the two things that people generally have most trouble with.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have such a strong sense of self and identity, we do find it difficult to not always be trying to find a self somewhere.
Mm.
Even if, it's true in the teachings in Theravada, we talk about the five khandhas, and often the whole business of anatta is described in the kind of mechanical way. Like you've got these different bits, so then there's no self. But each of those bits have a kind of sort of entity to them. You've got to get away from all that. That's why to describe anatta in terms simply of five khandhas or is possibly it could lead to misleading, misunderstanding, because essentially there is no self anywhere. There is no substance to anything, and this is very difficult for people to grasp because we are conditioned to think always in terms of self and things and objects and moments. We're always giving names to everything. And those names and those words and those concepts are misleading us. It's very, very difficult to get past those and to recognize that those are just conventions. That's just conventional language.
So you believe that there is no possibility of a self that underlies what the human is? There's no possibility that it could be there, but it's beyond human perception. We are just these...
I mean, from one's, if you practice meditation, you will see, you can't help but see that one thing gives rise to another. This is a very important part of Buddhist doctrine. It's known as Paticcasamuppada, and there's a certain formula. But the principle is that one thing gives rise to another. Out of one thing arises another. We talk quite conventionally about today. But where did today begin and where does it end? It doesn't really, only conventionally does it begin and end. The night, like the one day slides into another. Conventionally we say there's a change at midnight. Well, if I haven't got a clock I don't notice it, frankly. It's a convention. And we have these conventions, but the realities are that one thing gives rise to another. There is this constant flow and change, but we have these words and these terms which trap us, and we have to be very careful about that, and they trap us into this illusion of self.
Any more question? Interesting?
We've got some kind of next time.
There might not be a next time.
if I was here, I would ask.
If somebody is expressing interest in Buddhism who doesn't have any background at all in Eastern philosophy, what is the best way to kind of guide them to develop at least a superficial appreciation of what Buddhism is all about?
Well, for a start, I think there are very few people who have no background in Eastern philosophy.
Well, if they don't have a clue about karma or rebirth, that's what I have.
Well, I don't think you need to have a background at all. I didn't really, any more than anyone else in this country in those days. And but you have your experiences of discontent and You have your desire for something else. You have your ambition and all that. And you know, if you are ambitious, you can't help but notice that it's quite painful sometimes. And you know, it's not very difficult to draw attention to expressions of suffering that we all have. I know that if we just say openly, we just talk about suffering, that some people will find that as a term difficult, and they don't quite see it. But you draw attention to, you know, one's daily life and the tensions that there are, and so much of it is caught up with your desire and attachment. Talk about funerals. You know, why are people crying? Because of attachment. That's why they can't bear the thought of never seeing whoever it is again, and all that. You know, something is over that they valued and loved and are deeply attached to, and so there is suffering. Why is there suffering? There's suffering because of attachment. I'm in and out of prisons 3 days a week, and if I'm talking about suffering to the prisoners, you know, I mean, the prisons aren't, as places, aren't that bad. Even the worst that I've seen, you know, are habitable, and the roofs don't usually leak, and there's some food every day, and you could say that they're a lot better off than perhaps millions of people in other parts of the world. They've got a roof over their head, they've got food. It may not be very nice, but they've got food, and so on. But, you know, it's often a bit better than that. The places aren't that bad. So what is the suffering? The suffering comes from, I want to be somewhere else. I want to go home. I want to see my wife and kid. I want. There's the root of your suffering. You know? And that's what you've got to start pointing out to people. You know, people live lives of discontent. However much they've got, most people are not content. For varying reasons. I mean, in varying ways, really. They're not content. If you're not content, what is there in your mind then? Desire. Not being content, what is that? That's suffering, isn't it? You're not content, you're suffering because you want something else. And most people are like this. So then, I mean, this is what the Buddha was talking about. So this is where you're pointing into people's experience of life. Even people who are relatively well off and comfortable and all that. You know, it doesn't have to be that their nearest and dearest has just dropped dead, or the house has fallen down or something. You know, everyday existence has these stresses. And sometimes there's more than that that sort of, you know, points it up and wakes people up. You see someone who ought to be, you know, pretty pleased with themselves, and they're not. That happened to me.
The feeling of like and dislike, is that Vedana or mental formations or a kind of emotion?
Oh, well, I mean, feelings. Feelings out of control we might call emotions. When we talk about emotion, usually we're talking about extreme feelings of like or dislike. and feelings can run out of control. You have to be very careful about feelings. People are controlled often by their feelings. And often you will hear people say, well, I depend on my feelings, I'm feeling for it, or feeling against it. But you have to be very careful about that, because often those feelings are irrational and run out of control.
But when Vijana is also translated as feeling.
Feeling?
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you know that is Vedana, the feeling is as Vedana.
I don't quite understand.
This Vedana is translated into English as feeling.
Yeah.
But when you talk about feeling of like and dislike, that is the kind of, is that Vedana that is out of control?
No,
it's just an emotion that is out of control.
Feelings are liking, disliking, or indifference. That's Vedana.
Yes.
So if your feeling of dislike accelerates and runs out of control, it becomes uncontrollable. Some people are very emotional people. Their feelings are running out of control.
So that would be mental formation.
Yeah.
When it's out of control.
No, Vedana.
Still Vedana.
But it depends on the degree of Vedana.
Yeah.
How about rapture? Does that consider from Vedana as well, or no? It's a different?
Well, it's a different term. It's rapture is akin to a pleasant feeling, isn't it? And feelings are usually, they're classified as either liking, disliking, or indifference. If it's a nice feeling, then it's usually one you like. If it's an unpleasant feeling, it's one you dislike. And then you have something in between, which is indifference. But you have to be careful of all of them.
So rapture is different from Vedana?
Well, the context is different.
So it's a sukha Vedana.
Happiness.
Yes, sukha Vedana.
It's a form, it's a kind of feeling.
Any more interesting questioning? No?
รักษาตนให้พ้นจากทุกภัยทั้งสิ้น